Welcome back to another coffee break, or tea, I guess, whatever you've got on hand.
I
Krista,
have
Heather.
nothing this time. I should have grabbed a
Oh,
drink, but I forgot to.
I mean, we're calling them coffee break chats because we're pretending that we work in an office or something. So,
Yeah.
um,
Water cooler chat, something like that. Yeah.
water cooler, something.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have been thinking a lot about our last conversation about leadership and why and how we often end up with these kind of not always great forms of leadership. So I thought maybe we could unpack a little bit this idea of a leader in every chair, because we use that language on our sales page for leadership for liminal spaces. And
Right.
if you have any familiarity with the circle way, you might be familiar with that phrase. But I thought maybe it'd be useful, Heather, if we unpack that a little bit and
Yeah.
why we think it's important in order to help be an antidote for authoritarianism to some extent.
Right. Yeah.
So why don't you start by just sort of explaining what we mean by
Right.
a leader in every chair?
Yeah, and even before we do that, I feel like maybe we could talk a little bit about what we mean by a leader, even before we get to a
Yes,
leader in every chair,
totally.
because I think even when we've been talking for years about developing leadership programs, and we were a little reluctant to use the language of leader. Partly because a lot of people that come to our work don't see themselves as leader because they tend to do,
Mm-hmm.
if they're doing the work of holding space, you tend to think of yourself as a background kind of person, or maybe somebody who's not out front in the way that leadership sometimes implies. And so
Yeah.
we wanted to be inclusive of all of those people, but then we started to realize, but we also have something important to say to people who recognize themselves as leaders. And so when we talk about leader, we are not just talking about the upfront leader. We are talking about anybody willing to show up to make a contribution to the collective good. Anyone that sees their own kind of self-leadership in other
Mm-hmm.
words, their own ability to take some initiative, to contribute their gifts, to like, if you're planning a community event and somebody who decides to take responsibility for providing the food for that event becomes a leader of the food organizing part of that. So they may never be out in the front at that event, but they've taken leadership to contribute in that way, in the way that they're perhaps more gifted or have some skills. And so that's how we define it, as like, and especially since we work so much in circle contexts, it's like everybody we are inviting when we're developing a community or an organization, even when we've developed the Center for Holding Space, we're inviting everyone to show up with some measure of confidence and self awareness and self efficacy, that they know that they can contribute what is meaningful to the collective. And that's where we start with our kind of baseline understanding of leadership. And then when you show up to contribute in a non-hierarchical, or I should say, selectively hierarchical is maybe a better language,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
then you show up knowing that, as we talk about in the circle way practice that we use, a leader in every chair. So every person who chooses to be in that collective now recognizes that when I am called upon, or when my skills are called upon, I'm willing to step up and contribute and making a meaningful um, contribution to the collective good. So that's a little bit about the way we understand leadership, and the way we both sort of invite people to step in, and we make some assumptions based on their willingness to step in, that they're going to be that kind of leader in the collective.
I like that phrase, selectively hierarchical. I think that
Yeah.
echoes really well sort of what we were trying to get at last week. Because like you said, it is important on occasion in crisis and for other things too, that folks are placed a little higher in or are nominated to be in the
Yeah.
hierarchy at that point in time to
Yeah.
fulfill that particular purpose. Um, So talk a little bit about how you envision that working. And I know like you and I have been really deliberate in trying to do that within our own business. Like we
Yeah.
have a team that we work with and they show up as leaders in their
Yeah.
various gifts. But at the end of the day, the business is ours and we have to make the decisions about what's
Right.
best to do for our
Yeah.
business. And we do take their feedback all of the time and rely on them quite heavily to, hold us accountable and to help
Yeah.
us make good decisions.
Yeah.
But you and I are the ones that end up having to make the decision at the end of the day.
And be accountable for those decisions.
That's right.
When you're in a position of that kind of hierarchical leadership, then yes, you make more decisions, and often that comes with a pay increase if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
hierarchical organization. But if you're in an organization that also recognizes the circle, then you are accountable. You're not just the authoritarian leader that runs off and makes the decisions and
That's
isn't
right.
accountable to the collective. And the kind of leadership that we're talking about, especially in our evolving program leadership for liminal spaces, we are talking about the kind of leader that sees their responsibility and commitment within the larger collective. And so in in the circle way, which, and just to give credit, this learning comes from Christina Baldwin and Anne Linnea, who developed the circle way, and they've built quite a collective of people around the world that are continuing this practice and this body of
Mm-hmm.
work. And within that teaching, they talk about the triangle within the circle. So you have a
Mm-hmm.
circle, you have people that agree to be a leader in every chair, and there is always some recognition that there is that when needed, the hierarchy is going to show up, and we name it, we acknowledge it, and we may question it, or we may rearrange it at some point, or we may choose slightly differently at some point, but we have some awareness, like in the Center for Holding Space, the people who work with us have some awareness that you and I make the final decisions when it comes down to like really important decisions. We also, the bottom line, the financial responsibility rests with us. And so there is, and it's not necessarily always an easy relationship because it's a little less clear than just a pure hierarchy. And that's why
Yeah.
some people revert consistently to a more hierarchical leadership, because then I always know what's safe in the room. And I remember years ago teaching in a university setting, I was teaching the circle way as a facilitation practice. And I had somebody who came from Asia, I think he was from China. He came to me and he said, I love the circle way. It feels really right for me. He says, but I know this would never work in my context in my country because we're so used to having a visible sign of the authoritarian authority
Mm.
structure in the room. When we step into the room, we want to see who's up on stage or who's in the chair, symbolizing that they are the chair of the board or something. That is what feels safe in our environment and in our
Mm.
culture. And so that was always a real eye opener for me of what people's expectations is in terms of feeling safe, because that circle can feel really unsafe if you're of a culture or of a history or something that has been taught to respect authority and to seek out that authority for your safety. It takes some maturity, it takes some
Mm.
self reflection, self-knowledge, recognizing what might activate your nervous system in terms of what feels unsafe. And yet, as people evolve, as communities evolve, I do believe it's the healthiest option that we can point towards or that we can move more and more towards in terms of taking care. And it's that collective care piece, it's collective responsibility, collective
Mm-hmm.
decision making, so that everybody in our collective has the same amount of rights, has the same amount of access to care, all of those things. um, but it's hard to enact because we don't like, and our cultures tend to be somewhat immature in many ways in terms of what we're seeking, as we're seeing right now in the political system. We're looking for somebody who's the kind of carries the big stick and is the authoritarian leader in that. And so we become uncomfortable with what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think there are many indigenous cultures that would argue that this immature style of leadership can actually decimate these more
Yeah.
mature approaches to leadership. And I mean, they have long and ugly histories of that having happened to them. And yeah, like I guess my fear is that we're seeing that again, that the violence of that immaturity, if we want to call it that,
Yeah.
is at risk of undoing so much of the work that I think we have done as societies and collectives and democracies,
Yeah.
for lack of a better
Yeah.
phrase. I mean, I know that can be a loaded word too, but um yeah. And it, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how, in the last couple of years, you had really sort of honed down on holding space being such a personal thing. Like holding space for yourself was really kind of the core at where holding space has to start.
Mhm.
And in the same breath, it is also such a collective thing, right? Like you hold
Mhm.
space for yourself so that you can be in a better, more healthy, more mature
Yeah.
collective kind of space,
Yeah.
yourself and together. So I don't know if you want to unpack that a little bit more in the 2 minutes
Yeah.
we've got here.
Well, when I think about the
I was asked
kind
these
of,
big questions and give you like these really tight time
I
spaces. I'm
know, I
sorry.
know, we have so much to unpack. That's why people listening come to our webinars for
Yeah,
leadership
come to the
elimination
webinars,
and to our study
come to
groups
the
because
study
we
groups.
unravel it more and more. But I think that yeah, when we think about holding space as a practice, it's a practice rooted in a mature self-reflection and a
Mm,
mature capacity for relationship. And
yeah.
when I say that, I mean that if I'm going to hold space for you or be in relationship in a way that's not codependent, is not toxic, is not manipulative, etc., I need to be self-aware of my own nervous system activation, of what makes me unsafe, of what threatens my sense of belonging in that situation, because I'm going to be activated if I show up in an environment, let's say it's an organization that's trying to enact a more circular leadership model. And every time I'm in a meeting of that organization, it takes far too long to make decisions. It's far too unclear who's responsible for those decisions. There's a certain amount of chaos because we're trying to collectively make decisions. That can feel extremely unsafe to somebody who's not done any of that healing, self-reflection, trauma awareness kinds of stuff. And so it does require people to do that, to show up in a way, not that you've healed everything, like goodness
Mm,
knows we're all unhealed people still trying to wrestle with these, but at least
yeah.
then I'm not going to project it onto other people or onto the group. I'm not going to blame everybody because I know in the experiences I've had, those people who've done little of that kind of work are the ones that are going to disrupt the process, are going to project and blame other people for not fixing things, are not going to take self-responsibility for what they contribute or don't contribute. So it's work that requires us to keep evolving and keep looking to ourselves to check in, like, am I disrupting this out of my own lack of belonging right now? Or am I, are these legitimate needs, or are these needs that are rooted in my wounded child self? So yeah,
Mm,
it's all intertwined. You can't have a mature collective without mature individuals in that
yeah.
collective.
And it's easier to mature as an individual when you have a collective that is helping create an environment to do it too, right? Like
Exactly.
it does
Yeah.
very much go hand in hand, which is,
Yeah.
I think, the way your my brain works, sort of the beauty of our relationship, because you're like, this is the thing, and I'm like, and also this.
Yeah. Exactly. And at the same time, there's little like we're taking responsibility for ourselves and not
Yeah,
deflecting or projecting, or
absolutely.
it
Absolutely.
has to be that balance. So yeah,
Totally.
it's the collective feeds the individual and the individual feeds the
Individual feeds the
collective. As
collective
we
without a
evolve
doubt.
as individuals, we're further along if we're doing it side by side with others that are evolving as well.
Totally. I saw something today that said it's not about healing, it's about building capacity. And I think what you just sort of indicated is totally in that vein. It's not
Yeah.
about being totally healed. It's about building your capacity to help yourself feel safe
Yeah.
in relationships, in whatever it is that you're involved in.
Yeah,
So there
exactly.
are a bunch of ways that you can learn more about this stuff. If the words safety, belonging, identity tweaked for you, become a paid subscriber on Patreon.
Yeah.
Or not Patreon, wrong platform.
Substack.
Substack.
Substack. Yeah.
Don't have a Patreon yet.
No.
Substack, and you can download Heather's videos on the core needs triad.
Yeah.
And we are going to be getting more into the qualities of a grounded guide, which is sort of very much some of the things we were talking about in our next webinar coming up in, I guess, next week already.
Yeah.
Yeah,
27th,
crazy.
I think, February 27th.
27th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so make sure you register for that if you haven't already, because we're gonna get into some of the thicket of that. And then
And
we'll have a
join the
study
study
group
group
afterward.
to unpack
Yeah,
it more, because we're having these beautiful conversations with the people
amazing
that are coming to
conversations.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, really, really amazing what the collective is bringing to these conversations. So yeah, you're going to want to get in on that as well. So
Yeah.
check it out on our website, centerforholdingspace.com. It's
Slash
new, it's
leadership for liminal
beautiful.
spaces.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of letters, I know.
Yeah.
But the links will all be in all the places. So
Yeah.
we'll see
Yeah.
you then. Till our next coffee break. Heather, anything you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, well, I mean, I think I just want to continue to encourage people. And I know it's a time that it's hard to hang on to hope, but we talk about
Yeah,
grounded hope and grounding our hope in the collective with people that also feel the same way we do. So I know that even having these conversations with you, I walk away with a more grounded nervous system, less activated. So
yeah,
come be part of the conversation is what I want to say.
absolutely. Yeah, same here. All right, till next week.